Well, hello. Here we are talking about the next part of our God's plan for your well-being teaching series. Now, if well-being was just a matter of what we do, I'm not sure we'd be considering it together each week as we are. Instead, we'd point out, look, here's some helpful information that will help you get your stuff together from some experts. No pressure, but it's up to you. Take a look and see what you want to do. And certainly there's lots that we could do towards our own well-being, mentally, physically, and emotionally, whether that's on our own with others or from the fantastic help of specialists and experts. What we find, though, is that many things which give us a lift in life, like friendships, food, sport, shopping, rest, as much as we have of them, they're never quite enough. And anyway, who wants life to be merely adequate? I don't want that sort of life. The thing is, you see, there's something about well-being that is from God, and it's only found in Him. That's the bit of our well-being we're thinking about right now. We're calling it spiritual well-being. Previously, we dipped into some difficult days for a bloke in the Bible called Elijah. They came quite hard on the back of what might be termed a super successful episode in his life, which unfortunately someone rather important and influential hated him for. That's worth noticing because of all the things we kid ourselves about well-being, one of them is that if I was more successful, my well-being would be safely and securely off the charts and pretty much invincible. We kid ourselves that if everyone likes us one day, then when we're successful, it'll all fit together just right. But Elijah reminds us that apparent success offers no guarantees of well-being and can also be the quickest way to discover our enemies and who they are. So I'm going to read from the Bible now, a section from 1 Kings, chapter 19, and starting at verse 3. Then he was afraid, and he rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It's enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank, and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and he ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he came to a cave. And he lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke into pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. and after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came the sound of a low whisper. The first thing I want to point out about spiritual well-being as we consider this part of the Bible is God's gracious initiative. It strikes me that Elijah wasn't asking for restoration or looking for any improvement in his well-being. He prayed, "It's enough now, Lord, take away my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." If it makes you feel any better, I don't think he had any sense that one or all of the dials of his well-being were in the red. He seemed to have no idea whatsoever. Elijah was asking for quite the opposite of well-being. He wanted to stop being. If God had answered Elijah's prayers how he intended, he wouldn't have been a very well-being. But despite Elijah's prayers, God answered by acting for Elijah's good. You see, God doesn't stop being good when it seems he's silent or absent. He hasn't stopped being good when he's not meeting our expectations, when he doesn't appear to be doing exactly what we've told him to do in our prayers. He doesn't even stop being good when we accuse him of not caring. When Elijah didn't care for his spiritual well-being, when we don't care for our spiritual well-being, God is acting for our good. He's good. It's what he did in dying for us, in rescuing us from sin and death. God acted at the cross for our well-being. God is acting for our well-being. Yes, yours. This is part of why I believe well-being is just incomplete without God. It's maybe only ever adequate. It's why well-being is ultimately found in him. Spiritual well-being isn't a method or a way of spirituality where I must discover how to get my spiritual stuff together. After all, it's not about stuff, but our most important relationship. Spiritual well-being begins when we recognize who God is, how gracious he is. He is good, and he's already acted for our good in Jesus dying for us. Spiritual well-being grows, it increases, it develops and expands, it raises in us as we continue trusting God like this. I want you to know today how much God cares about your spiritual well-being. I want you to know that. I wonder what you think of all that God has made possible for your well-being. I wonder how you think about it. Do you believe he's answering your prayers despite you and for your good? Because he is so, so good. While you're chewing on that, let's move on. Because Elijah seemed completely unaware of his poor spiritual well-being. Instead, you probably see that he seemed more aware of what he wanted than what he most needed. Recognizing our spiritual needs can be a bit tricky. Usually, most people can recognize their physical needs without too much instruction. Even a small child knows their physical needs, and they make sure that you know about it as often as those physical needs occur in the usual fashion. Some people are reasonably good at recognizing their emotional needs too. Sometimes some people don't. No names mentioned, no nudging on the sofa now. Sometimes people recognize their emotional needs. But it turns out we're least likely to recognize our spiritual needs. Don't know if you've noticed this, but while we are somewhere in the middle of this particular pandemic, one of the things I hear plenty of talk about is people desperate for getting back to normal. People want to get back to normal. Now, maybe my memory is playing tricks on me, but I don't remember people being all that impressed with normal before. Do you? I'm not sure we even want normal, let alone actually need it. Getting out of a pandemic sounds like a fantastic idea. I think we need that, but we need it for all of us as well, not just for wealthy nations. But old normal? Is that really what everybody needs? My point is that, like Elijah, we all too easily get wrapped up in our wants when well-being means we understand something about what we really need and how we're going to know that need in a relationship with God. That aspect of our well-being, our spiritual well-being. What is our greatest need today? What is your greatest need today? Well, for all the needs that Elijah had at this moment, we see that God responded to his greatest need with encounter. When we look at this time in Elijah's life, I wonder what we'd actually say his greatest need was. Was it escaping from a very real and serious threat? Did he need physical protection? Did he need safety and security? He seemed pretty burnt out. Maybe he just needed more rest and recovery, time to heal, a bit longer on the mountain. Maybe we think his greatest need, frankly, was just to calm down, get a grip, pull himself together. After all, Elijah's thinking was all over the place. What should be said to address his unchecked pessimism and his overactive sense of self-importance that he did need to be greater than all his fathers. Step one could have been a pep talk, which a few home truths about the 7,000 others in Israel who hadn't bowed to this false god. Elijah wasn't actually alone. Check that, Elijah. But God knew all of that, and he took the initiative to be closer to Elijah. That's to meet his greatest need. God, who is the truth, will speak the truth to Elijah, but first he spoke to Elijah's heart before his head. God called it passing by. I'm calling it encounter. God took the initiative to be closer to Elijah and in that way meet his greatest need. Just think about that with me for a few moments. We know from all the repeated times in the Bible that God is present everywhere. Okay? In other words, God was already in the cave with Elijah, and yet he'd asked this man to step out of the cave, step outside and encounter him. I suspect everything that had happened and was said outside the cave could have been done and said in the cave. And yet God called Elijah to stand before him outside on the mountain. After all, Moses encountered God in what was basically a very, very small cave, a tiny fissure in a rock. We read of it in the Bible. It wasn't about a cave experience or a mountaintop experience. I believe God was with Elijah in the cave. It's just that Elijah didn't seem very aware of it. God called Elijah to stand in a place where he would be more aware of God's presence. That's what encounter is all about. In that same way, God knows our greatest needs, and he calls each of us to a place where we are most aware of his presence. A place of transformation, of restoration, a place of healing, a place of greater fruitfulness, a place of abundance, not a place of adequacy, a place of well-being. Spiritual well-being happens when we are most aware of God's presence. How, I wonder? Where? Why are you most aware of God's presence? When are you most likely, most ready, most open to encounter him? There's probably loads of practical things that you could do that might help you hear God's voice better, be aware of his presence. If you think you know them, then why not give them a try? But however, before I start trying to wrap up and land this, I want to consider just one thing that I think we can learn from this still small voice encounter, Elijah's encounter with God. Remember, you see, not so long ago when it was all going great, God had answered Elijah's prayers with fire on another mountaintop, Carmel. If Elijah in this moment was busy looking for God in the fire outside his cave, thinking, well, that's what God did the last time he seemed to answer with fire, I wonder what would have happened. Elijah could well have known that many years before, when Moses encountered God on this very mountain that he was stood on, the earth shook. Now, if Elijah was busy looking for God in the earthquake, because that's how God speaks sort of here and now, I wonder what would have happened. In the same way, many others had heard God speak in the thunder, and Elijah might have been familiar with Psalms of an old king before his time, King David, who'd written about the God of glory who thunders. If Elijah was busy listening for God in the roaring wind, like, right, that's roaring, is that thunder? Is that you, God? I wonder what would have happened. Each natural phenomena was a sign of God's power, his majesty, and his great authority. Yet Elijah knew that each of them was not God. What would have happened if he was convinced that God must have been in at least one of them? Oh, come on, fire. I know fire's how God's... right, earthquake. Whoa, that must be God. And now thunder. Wow. Would he have ever heard the still small voice? Would he have even been trying to hear the still small voice? I'm trying to imagine what I would have done with the kind of history and experience that Elijah might have had. Maybe I'd be thinking, perhaps it's fire, earthquake, thunder. Is that a combination of the three? Was one longer than the other? Does it mean something that the fire came first? Is there something significant in the order of them? Hold on, I've got to figure this out. I've got to understand what God is saying. What am I going to do? How am I going to work this out? Now there's this sort of noise in my ears. What is that ringing in my ears? Is that my tinnitus going again? No, it's God speaking in his still small voice. He's never spoken like that before. Never to anyone else, but now to Elijah. So the one thing I think we need to hear and learn from this passage about hearing God is we all, like Elijah, need to be as clear as we can what is not God. Because if we're thinking that it might be God, we're less likely to hear what is God. It might even be about God. It might say something about his majesty or authority or his greatness or his goodness. But is it God speaking to me now? Is that what he's saying? Do I want to hear about God or do I want to hear God? I know what one I want. What about you? Still today, actually, few people hear God in massive, dramatic signs. Many, many more sense a very gentle prompting from God, like his voice is deep down inside of us. And it turns out too that the rest, which is so important for our physical well-being, is also vital for our spiritual well-being. The Bible calls this rest Sabbath, but Sabbath isn't just about the absence of activity, it's about living to listen. Living to listen is great for our spiritual well-being. When we're living to listen, we want to just clear out of our lives everything that's in the way that's not God, that might distract us or drown us out from his still, small voice. I wonder, what are you living for? I wonder, what are you listening to? We've thought about that aspect of our well-being we call spiritual well-being. We've recognized how much God cares about our spiritual well-being, including what he's already done for you. We've noticed how easy it is not recognizing our need for spiritual well-being. I've talked about encountering God and hearing his small voice. Now I'm getting to that so what bit at the end. I hope you've heard how much God cares about your spiritual well-being. This is the moment to ask yourself how much you are going to care about it. I wonder if you've heard his voice. I wonder if you've ever responded to it. Deep down inside, his still small voice, speaking to you, calling you out of a cave and into a place of his presence. I wonder whether you're most aware of what you want or what you really need, your greatest need. What might God be asking you today? Are you conscious of things in your life that are not God, which you could listen to him better without? If you know you could listen to him better without those things, what are they doing in your life? What might God's still small voice be saying through you? Elijah went from this encounter and spoke purposes to many others. One individual would turn out to be like him, but to do even greater things. Your spiritual well-being is meant to bear fruit in other people's lives too. What might your spiritual well-being mean for other people? I want us to pray together about that in just a few moments, but first, I want us to respond to God in worship together.